All right, so um, today we're going to dive into a part of World War II that doesn't get talked about all that much.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the Italian campaign of 1943.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We've got James Holland's new book, The Savage Storm, here.
Right.
And we're also going to use some of his insights from the Rest is History podcast.
Yeah.
So are you ready to kind of uncover the doodle reality behind Churchill's soft underbelly myth?
Absolutely. And it's really interesting how a simple phrase like soft underbelly
Yeah,
can really shape, strategic thinking on such a massive scale.
totally.
Makes you wonder, how many lives were impacted by just that one little
Well,
catchy but very misleading statement.
absolutely. So let's rewind the clock back to September 1943.
Okay.
The Allies are fresh off of their victory in North Africa,
Right.
and they're eager to push further into Europe.
Yeah.
Italy, under Mussolini at this point, is teetering on the brink of collapse.
Yeah.
It seems like the perfect opportunity, right?
Yeah. It did. On
Mhm.
paper, it did. And I think, the Allied leadership really saw this as a chance to knock Italy out of the war,
Of course.
tie down some German troops, and also establish some air bases within striking distance of Germany itself.
Yeah.
So, kind of a logical next step.
So it seemed. But as we learned from Holland, the reality on the ground was anything but easy.
Right.
He paints a very vivid picture of Italy's unforgiving mountainous terrain,
Yes.
the fierce resistance that was put up by the German forces,
Yeah.
and then the limited resources that the Allies could actually commit to this campaign.
Well, and also you have to remember that this is all happening when the Allies are gearing up for the massive undertaking of D-Day.
Yeah.
So, the Italian campaign kind of gets treated as a bit of an afterthought,
Yeah.
and it was forced to make do with whatever was left over.
Yeah, I mean, it really highlights the strategic dilemmas that were faced by Allied commanders at the time,
Yeah.
trying to juggle multiple fronts,
Well, yes.
allocate the limited resources,
Yes.
trying to predict, what the
Yeah.
enemy was going to do.
Yeah.
And you see this tension play out pretty dramatically in Operation Avalanche, which were the Allied landings at Salerno,
Right.
just 6 days after they'd crossed the Straits of Messina.
Yeah. Yeah.
Salerno was a gamble, wasn't it?
Huge gamble. Yeah, it was.
I mean, Holland describes this chaotic scene
Yeah.
with the Allies being outnumbered.
Totally outnumbered. Yeah.
They're lacking sufficient landing craft,
Yeah.
and they're relying very heavily on uh, naval and air power to compensate.
It was a very close run thing.
Right?
For a while, it looked like they might actually be pushed back into the sea.
Yeah,
The fighting was absolutely ferocious.
yeah.
Heavy losses on both sides.
You know what? I'm struck by this quote from a British soldier that Holland highlights.
Right.
He describes Salerno as a bloody, bloody business.
Yeah, it really kind of underscores the sheer intensity of the fighting there.
Sure.
And it just shatters the illusion of that soft underbelly.
Right.
They had to fight tooth and nail for every single inch of Italian soil.
Yeah.
They were up against very determined German defenses,
Right.
and it just created logistical nightmares every step of the way.
One aspect that Holland brings to life so vividly is this clash between this brutal modern warfare
Right.
and the backdrop of Italy's ancient history and culture.
Yeah.
So imagine this. American troops are setting up camp amidst the ruins of Paestum,
It's incredible.
these magnificent Greek temples
I know.
that date back centuries.
Oh,
It's almost surreal, isn't it?
it is, yeah. And it wasn't just Paestum.
Right.
Holland talks about, German tanks maneuvering around the Colosseum in Rome,
Wow.
artillery shells raining down near Pompeii.
Yeah.
The juxtaposition is jarring.
It really makes you reflect on the utter absurdity of war.
Yeah.
You have these timeless symbols of human civilization.
Yeah.
And they're caught in the crossfire of 20th century mechanized warfare.
Yo, it's just insane.
And, the damage wasn't, it wasn't just limited to the ancient ruins.
Oh, of course not.
The fighting took a heavy toll on Italy's modern cities as well.
Yeah.
Take Naples, for example.
Yeah.
When Allied forces liberated the city, they weren't greeted with cheers.
Right.
They were greeted with utter devastation.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Holland paints such a grim picture of Naples in the aftermath of the German occupation.
Right.
Bombed out buildings, a shattered infrastructure, and a population that was really just teetering on the brink of famine.
Wow.
It was a humanitarian catastrophe.
Yeah.
The retreating Germans, they implemented this scorched earth policy.
Yeah.
They destroyed bridges, port facilities,
Yeah.
anything that could be of use to the Allies.
And as we kind of dig deeper into the Savage Storm, we see how this devastation in Naples wasn't just physical.
No.
It was social and psychological as well. Yeah, Holland really doesn't shy away from these darker aspects of the conflict.
Yeah.
And, he brings to light, the plight of Italian women who were forced into prostitution because of these really desperate circumstances.
Right.
And, the black markets that thrived amid all this chaos.
Yeah.
And the psychological toll this took on a population that had really endured years of war and deprivation.
It's a stark reminder that the impact of war goes far beyond the battlefield.
Oh, absolutely.
It seeps into the fabric of society and leaves scars that can take generations to heal.
I agree. And, it's in these details that Holland really excels. He unearths all these diary entries and letters,
Right.
firsthand accounts that really give a voice to the human experience of this campaign.
Yeah.
And one that really struck me was a New Zealand soldier's reflection on witnessing an Allied tank destroy a home
Wow.
to eliminate a potential enemy sniper.
That must have been a gut-wrenching experience.
It was.
What were the soldiers' thoughts on this?
Well, he really grapples with these moral complexities of such a situation.
Right.
He writes, you are in the way or out of the way. A yard or an inch can spell the difference between life and death, destruction or deliverance.
Wow.
And it just highlights that brutal reality of, what it was like to fight an enemy that's embedded within a civilian population.
Yeah, it's a sobering reminder that there are often no easy answers in war. And as the campaign progresses, we see this dilemma play out again and again.
Yeah.
And, culminating in the tragic destruction of Monte Cassino.
Yeah, that's right. It's a heartbreaking episode. And it really encapsulates the tension between, military objectives
Yeah.
and the preservation of cultural heritage.
Yeah.
Holland sets the scene beautifully.
Right.
He describes this ancient Benedictine monastery perched atop a mountain.
Right.
It was a symbol of faith and history for over 1,000 years.
And tragically, it becomes this focal point in the fighting.
It does.
The Allies, they become convinced, despite a lack of any concrete evidence,
Yeah.
that the Germans are using the abbey as an observation post.
Yeah, they thought that they were, directing artillery fire from there.
So Holland, he delves into these intelligence reports,
Yeah.
the debates among the Allied commanders,
Right.
and that agonizing decision to ultimately bombard the
It
monastery.
was a really tough decision.
He even uncovers this really poignant diary entry from a Benedictine monk
Oh, really?
that was written just days before the bombing.
Wow.
And the monk was expressing hope that this designated protection zone around the abbey
Okay.
would be respected.
That's amazing.
It's like this glimmer of hope amidst this encroaching darkness.
Yeah,
And it makes that eventual destruction of Monte Cassino all the more tragic.
it does.
I mean, it was just reduced to rubble.
Yeah,
February 1944.
yeah.
And it was this devastating loss
Mhm.
for, the cultural heritage that it represented, but also for the Benedictine monks who called it home.
Yeah.
And sadly, that monk who wrote that awful diary entry, he didn't live to see its destruction.
Oh,
He died from illness just days before the bombing.
that's incredible. What a detail.
It's just this really powerful and heartbreaking detail.
It is, yeah.
And it really humanizes the impact of this conflict.
I think that's what sets the Savage Storm apart.
Right.
Holland doesn't just recount battles and troop movements.
Right.
He really delves into those human stories that so often get lost in the grand narratives of war.
It's easy to forget that behind every military decision, every statistic, there are individuals whose lives are irrevocably altered by these events.
Absolutely. And, as we kind of shift our focus to the German perspective,
Mm-hmm.
we see how this campaign was really a crucible for their forces as well.
Right.
Remember after the fall of Mussolini and Italy's surrender, the German army was essentially left holding the bag.
It must have been a demoralizing situation. Facing a numerically superior enemy,
Right.
dwindling resources, a crumbling front line.
Yeah, it was. It was really tough.
Yeah.
But, initially, Field Marshal Kesselring, the German commander in Italy, He believed that they could hold the entire Italian peninsula.
Really?
Yeah, he did. And he even managed to inflict some early setbacks on the Allies, particularly at Salerno.
But those early successes were short-lived, right?
They were short-lived.
I mean, as we discussed earlier, the Allies eventually gained the upper hand.
Yeah,
They captured crucial ports, airfields.
that's right.
So why didn't the Germans retreat further north and establish a more defensible line?
Well, that's where Hitler's influence comes in.
Of course, yeah.
You know, Kesselring's initial victories, even though they were fleeting,
Yeah?
really caught Hitler's attention. And with it came that infamous Hitlerian spotlight.
Okay, I have to admit, I'm not familiar with that term.
Okay.
What exactly does Hitlerian spotlight mean?
Well, essentially, it meant that Kesselring was now under immense pressure
Right.
to hold as much territory as possible, even if it meant fighting a losing battle.
Oh, wow.
You know, Hitler had this habit of micromanaging his generals,
Yeah?
often overriding their strategic judgment with his own intuition, which, as we know, often proved disastrous.
So instead of making a calculated retreat,
Yeah.
the German forces were essentially forced to dig in
Yeah.
and fight this war of attrition in terrain that really didn't favor them.
Yeah. Precisely.
Wow.
And this really had dire consequences for those German soldiers on the ground.
Of course.
I mean, they were forced into this protracted campaign,
right.
and they were facing, you know, relentless Allied bombardments,
Yeah.
dwindling supplies,
Right.
mounting casualties.
Yeah.
Holland even recounts this grim detail about them resorting to using heated children's urine as an antiseptic because they were so short on supplies.
Oh my God, that paints a really bleak picture of the conditions they faced.
It does.
You know, it seems like that soft underbelly really turned into a nightmare for both sides.
It did. It definitely became a grueling slog.
Yeah.
And as the campaign dragged on, the human cost just continued to mount.
Yeah.
You know, both for the soldiers on the front lines and for the Italian civilians who were caught in the crossfire.
This brings us to a pretty crucial question that Holland keeps circling back to.
Yeah.
Why is the Italian campaign so often overlooked in the broader narrative of World War II?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
You know, this was a major theater of conflict, lasted almost 2 years,
Yeah.
you know, hundreds of thousands of casualties.
Yeah.
And yet it often gets relegated to a footnote,
Right.
you know, compared to D-Day
Yeah.
and the push into Germany.
I think part of it has to do with timing.
Yeah.
You know, the Italian campaign, it unfolded alongside these other major events.
Right.
You know, like the Eastern Front and the buildup to D-Day.
That's right.
So it's understandable that those events might have captured more attention at the time.
Yes, but I think we also have to remember the narrative surrounding the Italian campaign.
Right.
You know, it wasn't this clear-cut victory march,
Right.
you know, like the liberation of Paris
Yeah.
or the fall of Berlin.
Right.
It was a long, hard slog
Yeah.
marked by setbacks, controversies,
Yeah.
a heavy toll on both sides.
It wasn't the kind of, clean, heroic narrative that easily fits into that popular imagination of World War II.
Exactly. And perhaps, you know, that's one of the reasons why Holland's book is so important.
Right.
You know, he brings to light this complex and often overlooked chapter of the war.
Yeah.
And he forces us to confront these really uncomfortable realities
Mm.
and the enduring human cost of this conflict.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, if this kind of forgotten aspect of the Italian campaign is precisely why it's so crucial to study.
Yeah.
Because it really challenges our preconceived notions of World War II
Totally.
and forces us to kind of grapple with the nuances
Yeah.
and the complexities that often get overlooked.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. You know, the Savage Storm is just this powerful reminder that history is rarely black and white.
Right.
It's filled with shades of gray, you know, conflicting perspectives, unintended consequences.
And in the case of the Italian campaign, it seems those consequences were particularly devastating,
Yeah.
both for the soldiers on the front lines and the Italian civilians who were caught in the crossfire.
Yeah. Holland really drives this point home with his descriptions of the humanitarian crisis.
Right.
You know, the destruction of cultural heritage, the psychological toll.
Mm-hmm.
on a population that had endured years of war and deprivation.
It's just a stark contrast to that initial optimism surrounding the invasion.
Yeah.
Remember that soft underbelly myth that we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
It quickly dissipated as the Allies faced the harsh realities of fighting in Italy.
It's a classic example of, how political rhetoric and strategic miscalculations can have devastating consequences on the ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those consequences weren't just limited to the battlefield.
Right.
The Italian campaign had ripple effects that extended far beyond the war itself.
For instance, the destruction of Monte Cassino, it remains a highly debated topic to this day.
Yeah.
Was it a military necessity
Right.
or a tragic blunder?
Yeah.
And the questions surrounding that bombing, they raise all these important ethical dilemmas about the preservation of cultural heritage in times of war.
It also had this profound impact on the political landscape of post-war Italy.
Of course.
The devastation, the social upheaval, it created fertile ground for political instability.
Yeah.
And the rise of new ideologies.
Yeah. I mean, the Italian campaign wasn't just a chapter in World War II.
Right.
It was a turning point in Italian history.
Yeah.
It really shaped the country's trajectory for decades to come.
As we're wrapping up our deep dive into the Savage Storm, I'm left with a sense of awe at the sheer complexity of this conflict.
I agree.
It wasn't just about battles and troop movements.
Right.
It was about the resilience of the human spirit.
Yeah.
The moral dilemmas of war and these enduring legacies that shape our world today.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways from Holland's book.
Yeah.
It encourages us to look beyond those traditional narratives of World War II
Right.
and engage with those human stories that so often get lost in the grand sweep of history.
And in doing so, we gain a deeper understanding of the past.
Yeah.
And a greater appreciation for the sacrifices made by those who came before us.
It also challenges us to reflect on the lessons of the Italian campaign.
Right.
And apply those lessons to the challenges that we face today.
Yeah.
How do we balance the pursuit of our goals with the preservation of human life and cultural heritage?
Right.
How do we navigate the complexities of conflict
Yeah.
and strive for a more just and peaceful world?
Those are powerful questions. And if this deep dive has kind of sparked your curiosity about the Italian campaign,
Yeah.
we encourage you to pick up James Holland's The Savage Storm and delve a little bit deeper into this fascinating and often overlooked chapter of World War II.
I second that.
You won't be disappointed.